attending CrimeCon, and I'm trying to arrange that we can maybe do a live stream from Vegas, a sort of a StreamYard thing, and just get a kind of a update, kind of a diary on each day that she's there, even if it's just 10, 15 minutes. So it'll be understandable if she can't do it, but let's hold thumbs. So I think Stephanie's in Vegas right now. She's been catching various flights and so on. As I said, I don't think we're going to see her in chat, but it is good to see some of the members here: Robbie Robin, Goat Radio, Debbie McClellan from Glasgow, Mel Stiller, good to see you as well, Pauline Buckles, Graham Stanifith, Shelley Stanchfield, although Shelley says she's going to be planting some bare root trees. It's quite interesting. Zenaida Rivera, good to see you. PA Farm Girl. So I'm not sure if you guys saw on YouTube, I posted a little short of Timmy encountering a tortoise for the very first time. It was quite funny. The thing that wasn't so funny, but I suppose maybe it was, he wouldn't leave the tortoise alone. So I would sort of walk on and he would walk behind me. When I looked again, he was gone. And he wasn't in front of me, he was behind me. So to sort of repeatedly try and, but of course he's never seen a tortoise before and he really wanted to figure out what they're all about. I don't know if you guys know tortoises hiss. I suppose a lot of reptiles do. So in this episode, we're going to do the next 5 minutes in the interview with Alec Baldwin. I've actually sourced a 73-minute interview. I've put a link to it at the top there. The previous one was 35 minutes long, and I knew something was missing because I couldn't find where he's told that Helena's died. That's not on that 35-minute clip. And so I sourced another one that's 73 minutes long. And, it's quite ironic. In the last 3 minutes, so in this more than hour, 10-minute long interview, he's only informed about Alina in the last 2-3 minutes, which is, it's a bit unfortunate because you would almost imagine the interview would have been longer and more serious and more structured had they known all of this at the outset, right? Pauline says Baldwin does say something rather revealing after the 12:11 mark. Tapo EMT, afternoon, good to see you. China Rose, West Coast, 2 p.m. Yvette, I love Temecula. Am I saying that right? High Priestess Angelique, yo, what up? It was a large tortoise. Yvette Kelly, hi from Temecula, Wine Country, Southern California. Moving to Vegas in a month. Really, you're moving there permanently? Mel Stiller says, yes, I've just watched it. Robbie Robin says they tell him in a very matter-of-fact manner. I must say there is a bit of a sense that they don't, there's not really much, what's the word, warm and fuzziness around it, but I think one's also got to ask, is that appropriate in a way? In a way you might say yes, but in another way you could argue in a court, you could say law enforcement got emotional or something like that, or law enforcement got too close to the suspect or the witness or whatever. And what you do notice is that the detective leaves the room in order to bring I'm not sure who he did bring in the room. I'm not sure who that was. I don't know if it's his agent or who it was, but he did bring in kind of a friendly face, and then shortly after that they left. So, It is a difficult one, though. It did seem, but I mean, I think it was a shock really to everybody. Let's do a quick poll. How many of you thought that Alec Baldwin's response was sincere or believable, or, you know, like you felt for him, genuine? So how many of you put a 1 if you thought it was sincere or genuine, a 2 if you're not sure? Let's see what you guys say. So far a couple of 2s. Stefan waffles a 1, but I see mostly 2s. JH says he's an actor. Sunflower says 2. Marilyn Hendricks 2. So far I've only seen 2 1s. Andar Wajib says 2. I don't know, my impression was that I thought he was genuinely shocked. You must bear in mind, celebrities inhabit a different kind of world where everything's done for them and nothing bad ever really happens. Thanks a lot, Goat Radio. Thanks a lot for that. Yvonne Phillips says 1. Sharon Butler says 1. RT Noob says it was a genuine reaction. My subjective opinion was that I thought it was pretty genuine. You know, he doesn't like burst into tears. He actually just seems shocked. He's shocked to the extent that he doesn't say anything, doesn't do anything. He's just blank. And that's very much not like what Alec Baldwin's like. Alec Baldwin tends to be communicative, expressive. And this seemed like a genuine shock to him from the way I read it. Mel Stiller says, I thought Baldwin looked very shocked. Gianna Desart 2. So I know what some of you are thinking. You know, if you have made up your mind that Alec Baldwin is guilty, then he can't be shocked about what he did because he knew what he did. But I don't know whether that is necessarily correct. Whether he's guilty or innocent, he can nevertheless be shocked to find out what has happened to her. He may have known that what happened to Joel was serious, but I mean, he actually got a text from Joel, and he may have maybe naively thought that Helena was going to pull through. Remember, there are people around him that are giving him reinforcement. Is he really going to, you know, you would kind of think, wouldn't he be in the best position to know? But he is 64 years old. Anyway, my impression was that he was shocked. Maybe shame on me for being so gullible. I don't know. Maybe in hindsight, maybe a couple of months from now, looking at it again, maybe I'll have a change of heart. We'll see. Maybe you will. We'll see. So I just want to let you guys know that what you're trying to do in this live is analyze the statement. So we're not trying to put Alec Baldwin on trial. Bear in mind, he hasn't been charged with anything. And so we're actually at a legally sensitive point. And so what you guys say may be legally sensitive as well. So I'd rather that we look at the statements and examine that than sort of make absolute statements of guilt or innocence or someone being a horrible person or whatever your judgment is of the person. Let's try and keep it about what do we see and anchor it in the actual police interview. In other words, let's try and base our feelings and our perceptions and our knowledge on what we're seeing and what we're hearing, not just on what we've already decided, kind of thing. Does that make sense? Okay. Right, okay, so here we go. I think I'm going to have to play mod here. I'm going to have to play mod here. Oh, I see Bria's here. Bria, will you just pay attention to chat? There aren't too many other mods in here. I don't know if Jean Karras is coming later, but please try and just monitor what folks are saying. Like I said, I don't really want to put Alec Baldwin on trial. That is for someone else to decide, the district attorney. What we want to do here is examine his statement and just figure out what is going on there, right? And it's like that saying, it's hard to fill a cup that's already full. So if you've already made up your mind, then it's difficult to have a discussion about it. Whereas if your mind's open, then you can learn something new, I can learn something new. Our knowledge of this case can actually increase. Are we here because we know everything, or are we here because we're trying to be better informed, better educated on some of the cases that we're interested in? Bria's from France, and Bria's very much into fitness. I've got to tell you, Bria, I'm very starting to feel encouraged. Even though I broke my rib almost 6 weeks ago now, I managed to do 15 hours worth of sort of exercise, not like hard exercise, long walks, short swims, and a little bit of stationary bike riding. And the fact that I've managed to do almost 15 hours of exercise this month is more than I could have hoped for. So I'm quite happy about that. But I think I need to try and get into running from next month onwards. John Hammer says, okay. Ando Wadja, that's quite a good point. Ando says he doesn't bring up thinking she fainted, at least in the police interview. That's quite a good point. Okay, so here we go. So an alternative title for this particular episode could have been that the director called Baldwin prior to the police interview. Did you guys know that? Did you know that Joel Souza, even before Alec Baldwin spoke to the police, had actually phoned him? I'm not sure if he phoned or he texted him, but he'd communicated with him from the hospital to tell him that he'd been x-rayed, and the x-ray, the opinion of the x-ray was that it was a bullet wedged in his shoulder. And that was likely his opinion, but it was possibly also the doctor's opinion. You would imagine the doctors would have seen that sort of thing in that, in that hospital as well. And so you would recognize it and say, well, you know what that is? That's a bullet, kind of thing. And so that kind of tells you quite a lot about what Baldwin either already knew or what he possibly already knew, what he supposedly already knew. Okay, so our analysis here in part 2 deals with just the next 5 minutes of the interview, from around about 9 minutes, 20 seconds to the 15-minute mark, a little bit past that. So from the outset, what stands out here is that Baldwin went into the interview already knowing that, or having a strong reason to believe that, a live round went off. So based on what Joel Souza had said to him, he should have strongly suspected that it was a live round. And that's based on Joel Souza calling him and telling him that the thing lodged in his shoulder resembled a bullet. This also contrasts somewhat to what Baldwin said in his interview with ABC, where he said something along the lines of, like he said, and I'm kind of paraphrasing, something like, an hour later, at the end of his interview, the officer pushed her phone towards him and showed him an image of the slug and said, here, and kind of said, that's what we got out of his shoulder. Unless I've missed it, is that in the interview? If it is, great, but we also have another scenario here where right at the beginning, Baldwin admits to knowing there was a strong indication that it was a live round at the beginning. At 10 minutes, 10 seconds of the extended version, Baldwin recalls the incident, and he basically says, I don't know if you guys have watched it, but he says the same thing about half a dozen times, if not more. He says, bang, she hits the ground, she goes down. He kind of says that over and over again. And whenever he says that, this is an important part to slow down the narrative and find out the details, find out what did she do? What did she say to you? Did you try to help her? Was she breathing? Could you see where she was injured? Could you see that she was injured? Did you notice any blood? Was there any blood on you? What blah blah blah? What did you do? Did you call 911? How did you try to render aid? Now, it's kind of easy to say all of that in hindsight because we know what the situation was, right? At this stage of the interview, Alina was possibly still fighting for her life or on the verge of death, right? So it's easy for us to say in hindsight, you should have conducted this interview in a lot more stricter sense, and you should have asked these questions, right? But even if she did survive, like if you imagine that this round did pass through and she survived anyway, it would still be a serious enough situation to ask, how on earth did this happen? And what were you doing before, during, and after? Because that is really the crux of the matter, is the dude holding the gun, what were you doing immediately before, during, and after? And so repeatedly it says, bang, she hits the ground, she goes down, and they don't really stop in there and say, okay, where were you standing, and just try and get all the information there. What was she doing? What was she saying to you? Who else was in the room? What were they doing? What were they saying? And so it's important. This is an important part to slow down the narrative, find out the details. And I've said this to you guys already. It's only at the very end of the interview, literally in the final 2 or 3 minutes, that confirmation comes through that Alina has actually died of her injuries. And so the interview, as I'm sure you've noticed, it's not conducted with a degree of seriousness, sensitivity, and detail that I believe was warranted. That's not and I think it's important to make this clear as well, that's not the officer's fault. We can sit on this side of time and say, you should have done this, you should have done that, but they didn't have that information. So it's not the officer's fault, and it's actually not Baldwin's fault either. But it is a pity. So regardless of the fact that it's no one's fault, I'm talking about that the interview really ought to have been longer. It should have been in more detail. It should have been structured better. It is a pity that he gave his statement when he did, and that it was concluded when it was, and that he was given permission to leave prior to finding out that this had just become a homicide. Now, I think he did agree to come in the next day. So I don't know whether there's a second interview, and I don't know whether that interview is serious and structured. I don't know. I don't know if there is a second interview, but he does mention something near the end of he'll come in tomorrow. I don't know whether he would then be questioned again. You would think so, but whether he was, I don't know. Incidentally, when we use the term homicide, we simply mean the act of one human killing another, right? So according to the definition from Britannica, homicide is a general term that may refer to a non-criminal act. So homicide can actually be non-criminal, and it can also be criminal. It can be the act of murder. So homicide can be murder, but homicide can also be not murder. It can be a non-criminal homicide. Some homicides are considered justifiable, such as the killing of a person to prevent something from taking place, some other serious felony, or to aid a representative of the law. So, yeah. And homicide can also be accidental or negligent. Did you guys know that, or did you think homicide equals murder? Matt Clemens says, I agree, should have a more formal interview. John Hammer says, always curious about gunpowder residue. China Rose, that's quite an interesting question. China Rose asks, what are your thoughts on Baldwin covering his mouth? So that is an interesting question. China Rose goes on to say, it shows up in criminal behaviors or stressful times to hide a smirk instead of sorrow. And he said, I'm just asking why he did that. I think that is sometimes true, that sometimes they talk about, if you touch your face, that can be a subconscious cue that someone is not telling the truth, scratching your nose in the middle of saying something. It can be those things. It can be. I'm just talking about myself. I've been in situations where I've been told something and I've sort of put my hand in front of my mouth. And I think as recently as October the 3rd last year, I was online very early in the morning and I found some information. It was like one of the top stories on our national website. And I thought, well, this could be about my best friend. And as I got more and more information, I got more and more, my sort of heart fell. And I did definitely sort of, in a way it's to comfort yourself, in a way it's maybe to protect yourself in a way. No one was watching me, I was alone in the room. But I think I was definitely, I don't know. So I think sometimes that is a way that you experience shock. I've also watched a movie. I'm not going to go into any more detail than that, but I watched a movie that was particularly frightening, where my jaw dropped, like in sheer terror, and I put my hand over my mouth as well. And that's me. So I think you can argue it both ways. Sometimes I'm trying to think. I think Chris Watts is quite a good example, where he is giving the information to the agents about where the bodies are buried and what Shanann did. And I think he does the whole thing with his face covered. And I think that is to hide his emotions, to hide the fact that his emotions aren't really genuine. So I think, I don't know, I find it a little bit, it's a little bit of a difficult area, because on the one hand, he may feel genuine emotion, and emotion is actually very honest. You either feel emotion or you don't, and that's quite an honest way that shows who you are and what's going on. But maybe it could also be a combination. It could be a combination of genuine shock, and then also he's an actor, and almost that sense of being genuinely shocked, but also what do I do with this? How do I represent it or something? I don't know. But to me, the fact that he's a very expressive, communicative person and he's just blank over this, like someone's pulled the carpet from under him. He doesn't say anything. He's just completely, he seemed really shocked. I mean, he sits back and he's like absolutely frozen. And then only later he puts his hand over his face for a while. And you would think an actor would want to show himself crying or something like that, if that's what he really wants to do. I don't really get that sense. I get the sense that I think anyone in that situation, even if you've be negligent or whatever it is, you would be truly shocked, So anyway, that's my take on it. Goat Radio says, I wear cotton gloves when outside to keep from touching my face. Terry Dean says, law enforcement seem to minimize it, like they didn't think it would be too shocking, giving her dire condition. I don't know whether law enforcement are a little bit sort of numbed because of their job. So they may encounter, maybe in the course of their jobs, they've got to tell people a lot. This person is deceased or whatever. And it sort of blurs into one another. I don't know if you guys noticed that the detective actually didn't know her name, right? So I thought that was kind of unfortunate. Did you guys notice that? Graham, that is exactly why it's so unfortunate that you don't have the interview as it was, then the moment that he's told what happened, and then if only you had like another half hour where you could contrast what happened afterwards. You contrast, is there levity? Is he as talkative? Does he now ask, can I have an attorney? Whatever, right? So that is what's really unfortunate, is at this moment where he's told, you don't have anything afterwards to sort of compare it to. And I want to compare all of this to the Nicole Kessinger case, which some people have said that she didn't show appropriate emotion. But I think what some people also forget is, if you're very tired and you're under stress and you kind of being questioned, your job is to remember something. When you're trying to remember something, it's accessing a different part of your brain than emotions. And every now and then she did get emotional. But haven't you been in a situation where something traumatic has happened to you and you literally kind of forget about it? You kind of got to remind yourself about something horrible that has happened. I mean, I lost one of my best friends, it's about 7 months ago now. And yeah, I wouldn't say I've forgotten about it, but there are moments where it's a little bit removed and then you kind of remember again, if that makes sense. And part of that amnesia, I was actually thinking about it today, it sort of feels like that amnesia is there so that we can enjoy our lives. Because if we knew how fragile life was, if we remembered all of these things that were happening, we would be so depressed and so miserable and so paralyzed with fear that we wouldn't be able to function. So it seems like, I mean, haven't you had a breakup where you were so heartbroken and so hurt you struggled to breathe? And then fortunately, your psychology allows you to sort of just slowly forget about it. And then later on, you can almost barely remember anything. You can't remember anyway. And I think part of that is to allow you to function, because you wouldn't function if you remembered things as keenly the whole time, right? I also think we've become a very distracted society. So you can be someone can communicate something extremely urgent to you, like the most important emergency of your entire life, and then you get a notification on your phone and you can sort of disconnect out of the moment and connect to, oh, I got a notification on my phone, and what is it? Oh, someone liked a photo on Instagram. That's like completely new in human history, where we can be so almost inhumane just in terms of the human experience. You can be in a really, really urgent situation and then you just come right out of it because you've gotten a message on your phone. And that kind of potentially makes all of us psychopaths, because you aren't able to just focus on what is happening in the moment Oh, what was that I got on my phone? Does that make sense? Ralphie says there are plenty of other channels that cover this in 5-minute clips. That's where you should go. This channel goes in depth on every detail of the case. Is Marie K complaining? Marie K says there's so much rambling on this channel, I can't. It doesn't even have an in-depth understanding of the American legal system. Well, that's interesting. So I guess when I covered the Jodi Arias case and also the entire case and also John Benet Ramsey, I don't understand the American legal system. That's interesting. I wonder if you understand the South African legal system. Sure, that's pretty damn insulting. So hide user on this channel. Jeez. First time I think I've ever done that. Okay. So yeah, I mean, dealing with these questions on like subjective things is definitely quite difficult, because am I right in my subjective opinion? Are you right in your subjective opinion? And the answer is that it's subjective. So anyway, let's continue here. So the point is basically, can you imagine had all three of them gone into the cubicle knowing Alina had died, what the tone and the control of the narrative would have been under those circumstances? I think it would have been quite different. So at 20 seconds past the 10-minute mark, Baldwin speaks about the Wadding and also conflates what happened in the church with the Brandon Lee incident. Now, I don't know if you noticed, not only does he repeat over and over again, bang, she went down. He says that over and over again. He also talks about the Wadding, and he talks about cosmetic rounds over and over again. And instead of talking about the details of what actually happened, what time did it happen, where was he standing, what was being said, how was she standing, what exactly were they doing in terms of the scene, what were they trying to capture, how many people were in the church, where was the armorer, who, like, identify the people who were inside, it was Dave Halls, the gaffer, etc. You don't get any of that in this. I certainly haven't gotten that far, if it is there. And then Baldwin also conflates what happened in the church with the Brandon Lee incident. Now, I don't know if he was speaking casually, but when Baldwin says, and this is a quote, he said, 2 actors who killed themselves with guns. Well, Brandon Lee didn't kill himself. He was shot. He was shot at. And Jon-Erik Hexum's death in 1984, well, he did lose his life as a result of kind of playing around. And let's just do a quick poll. Do you guys want me to ramble on about Jon-Erik Hexum's death? Do you want me to ramble on and waffle on about what happened to him in 1984? In other words, just inform me about what happened there, or do you want me to just leave that part out? Ando said, I thought that was interesting that he brought up those 2 cases. It actually made me think that he maybe takes gun safety on set more seriously than I thought he would. That's interesting. Amy says, I love when you ramble. I think Amy's one of the members here who uses me as ASMR. So it doesn't really matter what I say. Matt says, ramble, why not? So, Salty Panther, you say, Alec guilty for sure. That's exactly the kind of comment that I don't really want to see. It's not really up to us to decide. He hasn't been charged with anything. Just bear in mind, if Alec Baldwin is actually watching this, and you make comments like that, you could actually be selected for defamation. And would you be able to go to court and defend yourself? Now, I'm sure you'd say yes, but it would be you and your lawyer against Alec and his lawyers. And so if you're going to make an accusation like that, you're going to have to prove it, right? So you're welcome to make Goat says, Lord, I was born a rambling man. Okay, thanks for your apology. So I just don't want to see you guys making sort of accusations of guilt, because it can get you into trouble. It can also get me into trouble. At this point, he's not been charged with anything, and let's just focus on the statement. So I'm going to take you guys through Jon-Erik Hexum's death. It was in 1984, and it was definitely pretty tragic. I'll put a link in the chat so you can see. He was quite a good-looking guy. I don't know if any of you remember him. He was active between 1982 and 1984, so he was sort of an 80s actor. And according to Wikipedia, one of the scenes filmed that day called for Hexum's character to load bullets into a .44 Magnum. And so he was provided with a functional gun and blanks, right? And so when the scene didn't play as the director wanted it, there was like a delay in filming. So the director wasn't happy with the scene. During the delay, Hexum sort of became restless and impatient, and he started to sort of amuse himself, and you can kind of imagine what he was doing. He's got a gun in his hand, it's sort of been loaded, and he's sitting around with nothing to do. And so he started unloading the gun, because I guess they had to reshoot the scene of him loading the gun. And so he had unloaded all but one blank round. And so, thinking he was quite clever, he spun the chamber, simulating Russian roulette. He put the revolver to his right temple, pulled the trigger, and then there was a discharge. And this is kind of what Baldwin was talking about. In this case, there wasn't actually a round in it. There was a blank using paper or plastic wadding. And what happened was, although nothing actually penetrated the side of his head, the force of the discharge, the shock wave out of the gun was so powerful that it actually indented his skull. So his skull actually pushed inwards, right? And that is actually what caused brain damage, right? So I'm just going to read what it says. It says, the paper wadding in the blank that Hexum discharged did not penetrate his skull. However, the explosive effect of the muzzle blast caused enough blunt force trauma to fracture a quarter-sized piece of his skull. I don't know if they mean quarter like a coin size or something else, but anyway, and then that was propelled into his brain, causing hemorrhage. And then you've really got to feel sorry for this guy. Hexum was rushed to the Beverly Hills Medical Center. He underwent 5 hours of surgery, and this also happened in October. On the 18th of October, age 26, 6 long days after the accident, Hexum was declared brain dead. So he survived it, but he, his brain didn't, and then I think he was unplugged from the machine. So there was a case where the wadding caused this blunt force trauma, which was fatal, right? In the Brandon Lee incident, Baldwin correctly references a bullet tip, something like that was lodged in the handgun barrel. But the bottom line is neither of these incidents are similar. There was no dummy round in the Russ incident. There was no lodged bullet or wadding of any kind in the Russ incident. You sort of got to wonder, didn't he know that if he'd seen if he was aware that there was an X-ray of the bullet in Joel Souza's shoulder? And I don't know whether that was sent to him. I don't know whether he was sent like a photo of the X-ray. I don't know whether he saw it himself. But, you just kind of got to wonder if there was a certain amount of certainty before he went into the interview. Why even talk about wadding and stuff like that? Anyway, just before the 11-minute mark in the 73-minute extended interview, Baldwin actually asked for a pen. So he's actually taking complete control, taking complete initiative. and he asks for a pen. He sketches out on a pen on a piece of paper, and he's basically controlling the interview. He's controlling what is said, how it's said, when it's said, what details are part of his story. And at this time, both the officer and the detective are relatively inert. They don't really do much. They're both asking or saying very little, and both sort of have their hands crossed into one another. The one's sitting kind of like this, so she's literally kind of got this barrier between her and him, and the other one is sort of sitting more relaxed with her hands crossed but kind of lowered down, sort of taking notes. Now, on the one hand, you could sort of criticize them for not being more interactive. On the other hand, I don't think there's anything wrong with allowing a suspect or a witness or whoever, the person you're questioning, I don't think there's anything wrong with allowing them to sort of blurt everything out, just to sort of communicate, allow them to volunteer their version, right? I don't think there's anything wrong with that, because in a way you want to get to that as well. I do think you've got to be careful allowing that to go on for too long, and also allowing that to sort of mind F you in a way, like where you get, I don't know, it starts distorting what you know or what you've heard. So you've got to also stay on your own brief, find out what happened. Don't allow somebody to tell you what happened, and you need to think critically, kind of thing. Matt Clemens says 18 inches away. It was, some people say 2 feet, others say 4 feet. Amy says, Nick has taught me how to stop and consider a different perspective. Graham Stanford says, I believe he was aware of the severity. He may have thought an injury occurred from a malfunction or whatnot. This explains the lack of emotion. Remember, innocent until proven guilty. Are you talking about lack of emotion during the interview or when he was told? Because I found him kind of emotional, his version of emotional. So after sketching his description of a dummy round with a hole drilled into it, Baldwin goes on to talk about wadding and cosmetic rounds. At 11:45, Baldwin asks, quote, what came out of her body that went through her body and into his shoulder? And then the officer responds, yes, pretty powerful. So to me, what's missing from this interview is a thorough step-by-step systematic review of the events, the production, his role in it. What are you in charge of? What is your authority? Where does it extend to? What were the safety protocols? It's, again, a lot of stuff we know in hindsight, but just basic things like the events leading up to the day. Were there any other incidents? The day itself and the incident itself. Instead, a lot of time is wasted talking about cosmetic rounds. So Baldwin uses a lot of those 73 minutes talking over and over again about cosmetic rounds. That really shouldn't have even been part of the conversation. It should have been, what did you do? What did you say? Who did you call? Can we have your phone? Or whatever. And so that is not how law enforcement are able to put together a narrative, by allowing someone else just to talk about cosmetic rounds. I mean, the issue isn't got anything to do with cosmetic rounds where we are now. Anyway, at 11:56, Baldwin makes another bold statement. He says, quote, every time we've done this, I'm here to tell you, to testify, she's done it right. So when I've kind of first heard that, I was like, what? I don't even know what that means. So let me ask you guys a question. Who do you think he's talking about here? So I'm going to read that again. He says, every time we've done this, I'm here to tell you, to testify, she's done it right. Who do you think he's talking about there? Let me just look at what you guys say. Ah, great. So now I spell it wrong. Thanks, Andor. Yeah, so Yvonne says Hannah, John says the armorer, Matt says Hannah, armorer, Hannah. Okay. Yeah, so I would also think that you would think that's who he's talking about. So what he's saying is, every time we've done this, I'm here to tell you to testify she's done it right, and we're all assuming he means Hannah, right? I must say, in the beginning, I thought, does he mean Helena? Does he mean and so if he does, what does that mean? But I mean, isn't this about what he did or didn't do? Isn't this interview about what did you do? Not about what did somebody, so he's already sort of directing attention towards Hannah, but he doesn't mention her name. That's also quite interesting. He doesn't seem to mention anyone's name in this, and Helena's name least of all. At 12 minutes 11 seconds, Baldwin demonstrates shooting several times while pointing, shouting bang, bang, bang. And then he says the following. He says, she cleans the barrel and she checks the rounds, that they're all cosmetic rounds or nothing in the chamber. She hands me the gun. I'm assuming she's done it the right way. She's been doing it for the last 2 weeks. I put it in the holster. I pull it out slow, turn, cock the pistol, bang, and she hits the ground. Right? Who do you think he's talking about there? Let me read that out again. She cleans the barrel and she checks the rounds, and they're all cosmetic rounds or nothing in the chamber. She hands me the gun. I'm assuming she's done it the right way. She's been doing it for the last 2 weeks. I put it in the holster. I put it out slow, turn, cock, and cock the pistol, bang, and she hits the ground. Now, I'm sorry to say, I've got a serious problem with this statement. At no point in my research has there been a version where Hannah hands Baldwin the gun. And yet, in describing the incident, he prefaces it with, she hands me the gun. Those are his words, she hands me the gun. And it's not like she generally hands me the gun. He's talking about, she's been doing it for the past 2 weeks. She hands me the gun, ... I put it in the holster. I pull it out slow. Bang, she hits the ground. He's talking about the incident. He's connecting what happened to Helena to Hannah giving him the gun. That's how I understand it. Is that how you guys understand it? Kelly says, I caught many changes in the story. Debbie McClellan says, yes. So at this point, I think you can draw a couple of inferences. So you can see there's some kind of discrepancy here or an inconsistency or a problem. And this is where you can kind of speculate, and you can either go to level 1, level 2, level 3, right? And this is kind of also what the district attorney's got to decide, and what ultimately the legal question rests on, right? So the first inference is that Baldwin may be simply speaking generally here. He's simply sort of speaking generally, and he maybe kind of misspeaks. It's kind of just, it's nothing to see here kind of thing, right? That's the first inference. The second inference is that Baldwin is fully aware that the critical question he's facing is whether the armorer did her job, right? And the answer is, well, she didn't hand him the weapon, and the person who did either didn't check or didn't check properly. The person who did hand him the gun was Dave Halls, and I think he actually admitted that he only checked sort of, when he says that he checked just about 3 rounds or 4, one wonders whether he did check, whether, did he check or didn't he check? I think he said, well, I just checked some of them, something like that. But the issue here is that the armorer doesn't hand him the gun. The other thing that I think is a good question, I saw someone else raise it, is whose responsibility is it In other words, who decides who is in the church? Who decides where the armorer must be? Whose responsibility is that? And I suppose one could make that question a bit more direct and say, was it Alec Baldwin's responsibility? And I think you could answer it in different ways, but one of the ways you could answer it is, isn't one of the safety protocols that the armorer and only the armorer should hand the weapon to the actor, right? And so do you then say the armorer was derelict in her duty, or do you say the actor was derelict in his duty, or do you say they were both derelict in their duties, both of them? On the other hand, you could say Alec Baldwin is a very experienced actor, so shouldn't he have known? Shouldn't he have known that that's the protocol? Or is it a case that the armorer should know her job? Again, or is it both of them, right? Sharon Lynn, good to see you here. That's the second inference. Anyway, the third inference is that Baldwin may have guilty knowledge here, just saying it's an alternative, which is why he doesn't mention Hannah's name and why he also suggests she was there or they were in direct contact with one another when she gave him the firearm. In other words, he seems to be suggesting something that isn't true. And is he doing that because he's got guilty knowledge? It's a question. So they didn't directly, Hannah didn't directly give him the gun. We now know that wasn't the case. But this question will be up to the sheriff and the district attorney. They've got to decide which inference they believe. Was this statement that he made innocently or sort of casually, or is he trying to sort of cover for himself, right? Is it insincere covering, or is it not very serious? What do you think? So they've got to decide what sort of level this rises to. Is it a civil offense? Is this really so serious? Well, a civil bureau has already given the production a maximum fine. And that brings up the next question. Is this a criminal offense? And then Baldwin goes on and he says, and he starts screaming, and this is a reference to Joel. And he goes on to say, and I'm thinking, did it flash around? I could see if it was Wadding. Now, I just can't get over the thing of, wouldn't he have known when the gun discharged that it was a live round? Wouldn't he have known the loudness of the bang, the recoil, and everything that he saw in front of him? Wouldn't that have been like, that's not a dummy, right? Wouldn't he have known? In other words, if you have experience with blanks and you have experience with live rounds over many, many years, aren't you going to know kind of instantly that felt like a live round? You're not going to need to look at x-rays. You're going to know. Question. Are you going to know? Would you know or wouldn't you know? Is the difference between a flash round, the one that killed Hexum, and a live round, is it almost the same, or is it still very different? Is the bang much discernibly louder in a live round than a flash round? I don't know. I don't know what the answer is to that. I would imagine it is, but I don't know. I don't actually know. So I suppose one could do tests. You could test the sound of blank rounds and flash rounds and so on, and to the human ear ask, can you tell the difference in the sound? Is there also a major difference in the recoil, right? And I think you could have some subjective answers to that. You could have weapons experts somewhat subjectively saying whatever. And then I think you could also have scientific answers to that, saying this is the actual force of recoil using this, and this is the actual force of the recoil using that. This is the decibels using this, and this is the decibels using that. So yeah, you could have something like that. Just in general, it seems to me that Baldwin is the only one who thought it was still a dummy round or cosmetic round or flash round. That's just the impression I get. I kind of get the feeling almost everybody, I don't know who else, thought that it was still a dummy round when they got there. And that seems to be where he's directing the focus of attention. Like, what type of round was it? And yet, as I say, he establishes right in the beginning of this interview that Joel Souza said it looked like a bullet in his shoulder. So why are we talking about flash rounds and dummy rounds? The other thing I doubt is whether anyone else in that church, after Helena and Joel were shot, thought that a dummy round was responsible. That's my personal opinion. I suppose you could ask them. You could ask the gaffer. You could ask the script supervisor. You could ask them, were you thinking that this was a dummy round, or did you immediately think it's a live round? So I could be wrong, but I'd wager most suspected or knew there'd been that it was a live round. You could ask the armorer the same question. Did you think it was a dummy round that caused this? Then why would she say, my career's over? What did the cops think when they arrived? Did they think it could be a dummy round? Anyway, between 12:45 and 13:15, that's minutes and seconds, Baldwin makes an interesting point. He says that they were rehearsing, hence no one was wearing any protective gear, and the gun was actually supposed to be empty. Let me just say that again. Baldwin kind of stresses that when this incident occurred, they were rehearsing. They weren't actually shooting footage. And as a result of that, no one was actually wearing any protective gear. No one was wearing headphones. There were there's no sort of protective screens or protective eyewear or earwear or whatever. And the gun was actually supposed to be empty. There weren't even supposed to be dummy rounds in the gun. That's how I understand that. It wasn't just supposed to be empty of rounds, live rounds, empty rounds, not even dummy rounds. It was supposed to be completely empty. Now, I've got to admit, maybe you guys can set me straight on this. I've got to admit to being a little confused here. In his ABC News interview, I thought the point of the exercise after lunch, tell me whether you follow me on this. I thought the point of the exercise after lunch, the point of what they did after lunch, was to sort of find his mark and also to direct the firearm up towards the camera to get a close-up shot of the firearm from the front so that the camera could see that the chambers were full. So the whole idea is to see the bullets in the chamber from the front, right? So if it was a rehearsal and if it was empty, how would you know you're getting the shot? How would you know you're nailing the shot in the relatively low light if it wasn't loaded? So that part I just don't understand. Why would you say, well, it's a rehearsal and there weren't supposed to be any rounds in it? Because one of the things Hannah says in her lawsuit, I think she says, she, I think, left lunch early because she rushed to her trailer or to the armorer department or whatever the setup for that, and then quickly loaded the gun. So why was she doing that if it wasn't even necessary? So that's just something I don't really understand, I've got to admit. So why was Hannah frantically loading dummy rounds if the rehearsal didn't even call for any rounds? That's the question. Just see some of your comments here. Matt Clemens says the sound would be so much more louder and deafening. I agree. China Rose says, you have me thinking Alec in character may not have the same personal awareness as Alec. Maybe the trauma is Alec dissociating from what Harland Russ did. Pauline Buckle says, why didn't he ask about Helena as soon as he was brought in for questioning? That would be the first thing I would say. That's a really good point. That is definitely a good point. And another thing another comment I saw somewhere else, which I think is very valid, is wouldn't you be asking every 5 minutes, how is Helena? Like, what does the hospital say? Have you heard from the hospital? On the one hand, again, I think you could say that's reasonable and rational. On the other hand, you might say that Alec Baldwin is someone who is used to being the center of attention. He's just not used to, maybe his thoughts were more on the whole production and all the responsibilities he's got. And in a way, you might say that's kind of unfair because he's thinking about everybody else, thinking about his family. But I don't know if it's that irrational to say you were so directly involved in this. You were sort of the closest to the events. Surely you would want to know that the person's okay, right? And surely wanting to know if the person's okay shows that you care. And you do. There is a little bit of footage where he says, "What's her story?" So he is asking how she is, but doing this particular thing, we don't see him doing it once. And, what does that mean? Doesn't mean anything. I do think one's got to be careful looking at things like how emotional is somebody, whatever. I think you want to be more scientific and look at what do they say and is it consistent, is it not consistent? Faticus, thanks a lot. You know what I mean? You can look at the emotions and you can be very convinced one way or the other, but that doesn't cut it in a court of law, and that certainly isn't something that is really going to factor into what the district attorney decides. The district attorney, just like in the Barry Morphew case, is going to look at things like, are this guy's statements consistent? Is what this guy's saying consistent? Is it credible? Is it believable? Is it anchored in, do we know that it's true? Is it the same thing other witnesses said? Does it stay the same? Something like that is a reason to decide one way or the other. Someone shedding a tear or not shedding a tear, that's not really going to cut it. You've got to have something more than that. Anyway, at 14 minutes, 15 seconds, finally, at this point, the detective sort of interrupts. The detective is the one sitting actually quite far away from him. I don't know whether she's sort of social distancing, but she's sitting quite far away. The officer is sitting actually very close to him, and the detective is actually leading the interview, although she's not saying very much. By the way, that cough I've just given, when I broke my rib in the early days, that a cough like that, a little bit harder than that, is why I went to hospital. It was so painful. So I'm quite pleased to say, like today, I've sneezed really hard about 3 times and no pain at all. So I seem to have healed a bit from that. I must say, when I broke my rib and experienced this excruciating pain, getting into a car, getting into the bath, putting shoes on, putting underwear on, putting a shirt on, trying to just get comfortable lying in bed, I actually really thought about what Helena must have felt, because it's something that would have entered that part of her body, sort of through the ribs, right? And it just gave me it's one thing to sort of sympathize in a way, in a hypothetical way, shame, something happened to someone. It's another thing to experience. I'm not saying I experienced the pain that she felt myself, but I certainly experienced this horrible pain and this, it's absolutely agonizing. And it just made me feel like, wow, she must have gone through something so much worse than this, and it's already so bad, So I kind of thought about that in terms of the injury she experienced, and then also the injury that Vincent van Gogh experience, because he also got shot sort of in through the abdominal area, And I think when you experience that searing pain, you key into an aspect of the human experience and an aspect to life that is where you realize we're not immortals. We're not all spectators. Bad things can happen to you as well if you're not careful. Okay, so at 14 minutes 15, the detective sort of interrupts and almost apologetically says, I'm going to back you up just a little bit, okay? So she's actually allowed Alec Baldwin to sort of take the floor unopposed, say whatever he wants to for quite a long time, about 5 minutes. Virtue without interruption. And I would say up until this point, Baldwin has easily said about 90%, 95% of all the words that have been spoken, if not more. He's asking himself questions, he's speculating, he's electing to draw things, he's taking the discussion in whatever direction. The detective and the officer have actually hardly said a word up until this point, but now the detective does speak. And this is the question she asks. She says, how long have you been on set, right? So she basically says, I'm going to back you up a little bit, okay? Baldwin says, that's fine. And then she says, how long had you been on set? And Baldwin chooses this moment to take a swig of water. So by doing that, he kind of delays the time between her question and his answer. So he answers, he says, I arrived, takes a drink, and then he says the 11th. Now, you could interpret that, this taking a drink of water, as purely functional. So why did he take a drink of water? He's thirsty. Or you could say he's quite nervous and he's doing it as a delaying tactic. After drinking the water, he wipes his face with a napkin as well. He describes flying on Monday, October 11th, from New York to Denver, Denver to Albuquerque. He even provides the detail that because he can't fly directly, he says he then drove to the set, they rehearsed and fitted. He says he flew in on the 11th, arrived on the 12th, and they started shooting on the 13th. Somewhere, I can't quite remember where, but I think he said one of his daughters was actually going to, she's going to do a small part in the film. And she's really looking forward to that as well. Then he also adds, we shoot a Wednesday through Sunday shooting schedule. We're off Monday through Tuesday. So even there, he's not really giving much information. It's basically to do with not being there. Denver, Albuquerque, and the schedule kind of thing. Now the detective asks a second question, and this is quite a good one, quite an important question. At 15:03, she says, quote, so the entire time you've been on set, have you seen the same armorer? Right, so this is quite a good question. Baldwin answers, and her crew, and nods. So it's also kind of weird. Why can we not talk about Hannah now? Let's talk about Hannah. But he says, yeah, I saw her crew as well. The detective asks, how many people are on her crew? Baldwin answers, what I witnessed was 3. Thus far, it's quite an interesting word there, witnessed. Thus far, Alina's name hasn't been mentioned once, and nor is Hannah's. But right here, Baldwin does volunteer her name. He says, Hannah and 2 other women. Interestingly, when the detective asks Baldwin for Hannah's last name, he actually can't give it to her. And I don't think he can't give it to her because he doesn't want to give it to her. I think he just doesn't know it. And he describes her as having multicolored hair, glasses, and not too tall. He describes the others working with her as brunette and taller, but in a very sort of general way. This is again why I say him not seeming to care about Helena. You might say that's very it's very impersonal, it was very cold or something like that. But yeah, you have him not even knowing Hannah's last name. You must bear in mind, this is someone who is very busy. I'm not giving it as an excuse, just saying It's someone who's got lots of projects going on, lots of responsibilities, and you kind of get the idea that he will pay attention to someone who's also very well known, who is of high status. And I don't know whether that's not the same for most of us. That someone who is, I don't really know how to put it. Someone who, well, I think you know what I'm getting at. Does that make sense what I'm saying? I'm saying it's not necessarily a sign of someone being cold or callous. It's simply you're paying attention to people on your level, in a sense. And obviously, you would think, regardless, you would want that person to say, "But how is she doing?" Right? Then at 16:51, the detective asks, "All right, what time did you guys start today?" So, in about 3 questions, the detective has kind of gone through basically the backstory. It's nowhere near enough, but basically now we're already at the incident itself. And he hasn't really provided any details. He hasn't said, you know what, there were accidental discharges, there were other problems. He hasn't volunteered that the camera crew quit that day, etc., or that they were short-staffed, right? I've just gotten a message from Stephanie saying she's just arrived. So I presume, I'm not sure if that's Vegas or her hotel, but anyway. And so she begins, the detective begins to deal with the day of the incident, and we're going to deal with that in part 3. So we're at an hour and 15 minutes, and that is really dealing with part 2 with this. And so we're really reaching the point now where the detective is starting to take control of the narrative, and we're now going to see what happens. Does she maintain control, or does he take control back of it? Does she get answers, and are they satisfactory, or does he kind of go back to Wadding and whatnot? And so that's really what we're going to look at. The other thing that I think is very important is, you may think that you know Alec Baldwin because you've seen him in a couple of movies or whatever, but something like this, like an interview like this, is giving you a certain kind of baseline. And you've got to be very careful. People also think that you're getting a baseline in a police interview, when the baseline can be fluctuating, because at certain times you know certain things. So I don't know whether it's fair to say that's the baseline. And that's the difference between someone who's very good at reading people and very good at true crime, and an amateur. An amateur will sort of instantly think that they've got a baseline, but they've already made their mind up. The baseline is going to be something that's going to sneak up on you, and it's going to make more and more sense as you go along. And I think part of what's going to give you a sense of the baseline is knowing things like he's got quite a forceful personality, that he's usually quite expressive. His baseline isn't that he's a quiet guy, that he's a passive guy, right? Does that make sense? What is really valuable in this is you're getting a certain kind of baseline, and then what you really want to do is compare the baseline you get in the police thing to the baseline you get in the ABC News, and to see how they compare to one another. And that in a way is going to give you a sense of credibility, sincerity. Do they line up with one another? If they do, then in a way you could kind of give them the benefit of the doubt. But if there's quite a lot of problems, then you've got to wonder, why are there a lot of problems? Why does something need to be covered up? Or does something need to be covered up? You know what I mean? Is that what is happening here, or is it just poor memory? And so these two, and I think they're almost the same length of time. The police interview and the ABC News interview are great to juxtapose next to one another, to kind of go, this is consistent. This is consistent, and so this guy didn't do anything wrong, or ... Terry Dean, let's see what you said here. Thanks a lot for that, Terry. Terry says, did you see the full interview where Alec Baldwin made FaceTime calls prior to the officers coming in? Maybe it's typical MO, but it's an interesting time to want others to see your face versus just a call. I did see that. It is actually very interesting because you kind of get, like if you think that he's not emotional there, he actually phones his wife, I think. And you can actually hear her talking. And I think he's, I won't say begging her, but he's asking her, he's quite insistent that she comes there to where he is. I think he says something about he's got to stay overnight, but you kind of get the sense that he wants a friendly face around him, that he wants to be comforted. And I can definitely, I think that's totally reasonable. Who wouldn't, right? And then she doesn't want to join him. And I thought that was quite interesting. I also thought it was quite interesting how he sort of said to her, you kind of got a different sense of him when he spoke to her compared to when he spoke to the officers. When he spoke to the officers, he sounded kind of upbeat. He sounded kind of positive, almost like he was putting a silver lining on things. When he spoke to his wife, he actually sounded quite despondent. He sounded like, it kind of sounded, there's a different side to him. And he said something about, I don't want to be in the public eye anymore, something like that. You kind of felt like he was, part of him was almost like giving in, that he was just like, I think he said, I don't want to do this anymore. And of course he has been, right? But to her, I think he was sharing how he felt at the time. I think he felt very defeated, frustrated, and, I think I can't really put it better than that. But I do think that also showed an interesting dynamic between him and Hilaria. As Terry said, or somebody said that he was rude to her. It was quite a brief conversation, and there didn't seem to be much support in it. I know he was quite concerned about whether their one child had been told about what had happened. So I think he was trying to protect one of his kids, which I think in a way is kind of commendable, that he's at least thinking about one of his kids. Just trying to see if I can pull up some more information on that. I've seen it, but I haven't really written much about it. Graham says, I agree, we don't know Alec Baldwin, and we all have our own quirks that may come across one way or another to each individual based on their own life experience. Our personal life versus public, vulnerable. That's quite a good point. Nisi says, oh no, how late am I? Nisi, you are like probably 10 minutes from the end at most. Terry Dean says he mentions his kids a lot and how involved he is in their lives. So I do think that is quite an interesting point, is the public persona versus the private persona. And that can be quite strong with actors. I think actors can be used to putting up a public face, putting up a brave face. And there's some people that are like that anyway, that people that aren't actors that put up a face. right? And you definitely see a different side to Alec when he's talking to Hilaria. He seems kind of deflated. He seems to need her support and want her support. Whereas when he's on his own, he kind of seems quite self-sufficient. He seems quite independent. He seems to be handling everything. I feel like I must stay on a little bit longer because niece is here, but I'm really done. I certainly don't want to waffle on, as somebody said earlier. Niece says, "Oh no, got a giggle from my hubby neck. We'll catch the replay." Okay. Thought Criminal says he offered up a lot of irrelevant information. That is often something to where you sort of raise your eyebrows. It's, why are we not staying on brief? Pauline Buckle says, is Timmy here? I think Timmy's lying on my bed. Bria says he only mentioned them when he said that his daughter was planning on coming to film a few days later. And at the end, he said that he was an older father. Yeah. Yeah, I don't know if it's that relevant, but I mean, I did think when he spoke to his wife at the beginning, that was quite interesting. There is going to be a part 3. It'll just be the next 5 minutes or so. If the people interested in chat go under 100, then I don't know if I'll continue. We'll see. Debbie says it's a knee-jerk reaction to go into damage control mode when something shocking happens. Yeah. So since niece is here, I think I'm just going to mention 2 things that happened today that I don't know, affected my day and just made me think about life in a way. The one is my girlfriend sent me a photo of a totally burnt out car and then another photo of a beautiful young woman, probably 25 years old, 30 years old. And yesterday in South Africa, it was a holiday, and I think it was Mandela Day or Freedom Day. And so a lot of people sort of barbecued, partied, had sort of midweek parties. I kind of went to a barbecue and had quite a bit to drink on Tuesday night. I had dinner with my dad and family last night. But probably this lady returned from some party, and I think it was like 3:25 in the morning or something, and she was obviously not obviously, but likely she probably fell asleep while she was driving. I don't know if there's a combination of drinking and driving and the lateness, but what people thought is that she fell asleep, she hit a barrier, the car then rolled or something, caught fire, and she was trapped inside the car and lost her life. And I don't know this person at all. My girlfriend knows her sort of indirectly, but even though I don't know her, like I just really felt for her. It was, that what happened there was her fault, but nevertheless, it just feels like such a tragic loss of life. Just such a tragic loss of life. Anyway, so that's the one thing. The other thing, remember I told you guys yesterday that the cat caught a little bird. Remember I said that? And so today, believe it or not, the cat caught another bird. So it's 2 birds in 2 days. So you might say, well, didn't you learn your lesson from yesterday? Well, so I took my dog for a walk today, and I closed the doors. I actually left the cat inside so the cat can't go outside. And then I put bird seed on a tray. When I came back from walking Timmy, all the birdseed had been eaten. There was like nothing left, and I put quite a lot in this tray. It's sort of winter where I am, and so this is literally what happened. So I come home, I open the door, the cat's like rearing to go at the door, like, let me out. And as I go in, the cat sort of rushes out. It probably wasn't 1 or 2 minutes. I think I basically came into the lounge and I put a short that I recorded of Timmy with a tortoise. I put that on YouTube, and something like within a minute or 2 minutes, the cat had caught another bird. And what had happened was the birds had thrown a little bit of seed onto the ground, and in a short space of time where I went into the lounge and the cat went out, the birds settled down on the ground again, and just like that, the cat had caught another bird. And I chased the cat, and the cat ran into the lounge, and the cat wouldn't let the bird go for a little while, and then did. And then when I sort of pulled the chair out, the bird, it was a sparrow again, this time a male sparrow, it was just lying there absolutely motionless, right? And actually a lot like the other one, the previous day, completely motionless. So I would sort of reach forward, put my hand around it, and then I could feel it wasn't dead. It wasn't not moving. It was just in a state of shock, and you could actually feel this heart beating like a mile a minute through its feathers. And I seem to remember it making almost like a squeak noise. And I just got the sense of, this is probably by far the most traumatic thing that's ever happened to this poor little creature. And I don't know, I think this bird was in a bit of a better condition than the bird before. And so I took it outside, opened my hand, and it flew off. It flew quite far. So I presume that one might be okay. But I was just astonished by how quickly the cat, just like this, really, really quickly caught another bird. So there's a killer in our midst. There's a killer in this house called Ivy. Yeah, Zista says it's their nature. It is their nature. Debbie says, what happened to putting a jingle bell on Ivy's collar? Well, believe it or not, there is a jingle on her collar. So she's catching birds even though there's a bell on her. That's stealth. Robbie Robbins says, Nick, you can get attachments to bird feeders which catch seed. Oh, okay. Yeah, I don't know. Like I think my girlfriend must take her cat back for a few days just so that there can be less death in my garden, kind of thing. But Ivy's definitely on a roll. She's found her, like they talk about finding your feet. Well, she's found her sort of Wolverine, inner Wolverine. Yeah. And, you've got to feel for the birds, because the birds, it's starting to become winter. There's less food for them. So when you put food out, they all come. And so it's like a trap to them, And that's why I said in yesterday's episode, I'm responsible for the bird's safety, right? I've created this contrivance, and so I'm responsible for their safety. And so does that translate to the Rust scenario where you create this contrivance where you say, we're going to have this situation in a church where you're going to have guns and lots of people standing around? Well, whoever came up with that contrivance, aren't you responsible for the safety? Same thing with the birds. I'm responsible for putting all the bird seed out there and all the birds coming to do their thing. Aren't I responsible for making sure that it's okay, right? Do you see how it's sort of translates? Does it translate? Yeah, I don't mind mice so much, but I would prefer the cat just ate cat food. But, I don't know if there's anyone worse than human beings. I mean, we eat fish, chicken, beef, lamb. I actually ate pork yesterday, and it was this big almost like a ball that you see in Asterix and Obelix comics, this huge thing. And we were about 5 people and we devoured it. And there was virtually nothing left afterwards. So Ernest Becker actually said that the whole world must sigh when a person dies, because every person, each one of us, leaves behind mountains of skulls, like and mountains of skeletons of, or just the animals that we've gone through in our lifetimes. Like one human being, the amount of animals we consume through eating, but also the amount of animals we destroy, where we've driven over them, or we've built things over them, or just through our paths of destruction. And so I don't know. And then the more people there are, the more that destruction is just multiplied, Mel Stiller says humans are this planet's worst predators. There's a very well-known poster where you see a great white shark and then a little frogman, a little guy swimming in the water. Then it says, this is an image, it goes something like this. This is an image of the world's most dangerous predator and a shark. And that is actually very true. I think it is very true. We don't think of ourselves that way because it's us. It doesn't really matter, does it? Robbie Robbins says, my cat used to cat and eat squirrels but leave their tails. There's a very cute squirrel thing that I am rambling on a bit now, so if you're done listening to Alec Baldwin, you're welcome to leave. I'm kind of at the 1 hour 30 mark, so I'm about to wrap up, but I did retweet a thing of a squirrel that is playing with a little ball on Twitter. It's just so cute. It's a wild squirrel that's just decided that playing with this purple ball is the most fun it's ever had, and it sort of jumps on it and the ball rolls, and then it jumps after the ball. It's pretty cute. Just shows you that animals also have a little inner side to them that wants to have fun, that wants to play, Sharon Butler says, I heard more wildlife is killed by our roads than cats kill wildlife. Probably. P. Willie says, all humans, in my opinion, fail to perceive serious, deadly, or serious injurious risks often. Movie people are paid to follow policies and procedures to reduce risks. Okay. Mel Stiller says, earlier today I tried my best to keep 2 crows away from a squirrel. Thankfully, the birds flew away. Yeah, well, look, nature can be quite cruel. And for a long time, when you watch these Viking things, there was a long time that people used to, I don't want to say this word because I'll probably get into trouble with YouTube, but they would kill animals in order to appease the gods. And there was a lot of animals that died as a result of that belief system for hundreds of years, if not thousands of years. So that is a total waste, killing animals, in that sense. So thank goodness that time has passed at least. There was also a time where they did that to people. So, at least in that sense, we've come a little bit of a way. Sunflower says, you must have a talk with Ivy, no bird's Ivy. Well, you can imagine if you can catch a bird in 2 minutes, which is really no time at all, then, I don't know, maybe I must stop feeding the birds. I don't know. Goat Radio says, I saw an otter today, first time ever. That's quite amazing. Otters are some of the most amazing animals. Did you know that otters can't swim when they're born and they hold hands when they sleep? So they don't float away. It's quite interesting. Steve Yeager says, my dog digs up moles and catches rabbits. I dread when she tangles with a skunk living behind my machine shed. Where are you from, Steve? Seems like you've got some wild animals in the area. Yeah, skunks can, that is something to dread. Brianna says, how come Alec Baldwin's fate doesn't match Johnny Depp's? I think it's totally different. The Johnny Depp case is a civil case, which is maybe why I'm not really that interested in it. It's so yeah, but it's quite interesting that there's this perception that what happened on the Rust thing is almost less important than the allegations in the Johnny Depp case. I mean, a woman died in the Rust incident. So anyway, we'll see. Iowa, USA, okay. Okay, so like I said to you guys earlier, Stephanie is in Vegas. She's attending CrimeCon. I've asked her if she can do a live stream with me from there, just updating us on what she sees, who she speaks to, some of the people that are participating. And so I'm hoping to report that we're going to do a special live stream from CrimeCon from Vegas sometime in the next couple of days. So look out for that. There's quite a few cases that are being discussed there. JonBenet Ramsey, John Ramsey's going to be talking. There's also West Memphis 3. Can't remember his name, but it's the one of the West Memphis 3 is going to be there, and it's not. Can't even remember his name now. What's his name? Damien Eccles. It's not Damien Eccles, and it's not. I know I can see the guy's face, but I can't quite remember his name. Anyway, he's going to be there. And then there's also something on the Delphi case going on at CrimeCon. So I'll try and let you guys know what's news from CrimeCon. Jason, yeah. I'm not sure what his surname is. Louise says, Rust was an accident in my opinion, but was an accident waiting to happen. Graham Staniford says, oh wow, that'll be one to watch for sure. Will you share some video, or will Stephanie by chance? Well, I've asked Stephanie to take photos. I don't know if there's a thing where you're not allowed to record video, but if she is allowed to, then we'll maybe see some of it. Bria says, I can't wait to hear about Stephanie's adventures at CrimeCon. Yeah, neither can I. Leah says, Damien is the only one I know of. Well, there was Damien, Jason, and then Miss Kelly, and that guy apparently made a couple of confessions. Not just one, quite a few. Is Scott Reich also going to be there? That's quite interesting. Is Scott Reich presenting anything? Is he giving a talk? Mel Stiller says, well, I'm off. Thank you, Nick, for providing a safe place for discussion. Goodbye, everyone. I'm also going to say goodbye. Thank you, Sharon, for making it. Also, Bria Lace, I think it's quite late in France, almost 1 o'clock in the morning. So I hope you have a good sleep. Thanks to all the members that are here. I see Nisi, Thought Criminal, Robbie Robin, Yvonne Phillips, who else? Goat Radio, Terry Dean. Thanks to all the members, and then also thanks a lot for the super chats. I should be back tomorrow, but as I say, if the interest wanes in the series, I'm not going to continue. I will be back on Sunday for sure, talking about the letters of Vincent van Gogh dealing with the London period. It's actually really interesting where he starts walking great distances to Ramsgate and other places, and he starts to want to no longer become an art dealer. He actually wants to start becoming a preacher. So it's already this this inner restlessness where he's not enjoying his job so much. So look out for that. Some of you, anyway, I know are interested in that on Sunday. I've also got another surprise. Don't want to tell you too much about it, but there's another surprise in the works, and hopefully it'll be ready for you guys tomorrow or by the weekend. I'm not going to say too much more about it, but it should be quite interesting for some of you, especially those of you who've read my books. So thanks for joining me here. Take care, guys, and I'll see you guys next time. Ciao.